This poor high schooler is Truck Kun's latest victim, and when he wakes up, he finds himself in an isekai world. But what he doesn't know is that he has a hidden trait that makes him immortal. The story begins in a medieval isekai world, where a high schooler named Ryo can be seen lying down inside an empty cottage. The cottage has no furniture inside, except for only 2 books and a knife left on the table. Ryo gets up, ignores these 3 items, and goes outside to get some fresh air. He looks around and sees nothing but tall mountains everywhere. He then looks at his hands and chants the spell, "Water, come forth," prompting a small body of water to appear magically and splash in his hand. It all begins a few days ago, when Ryo suddenly finds himself in a white, empty void. As he starts to wonder where he is, the angel hosting this realm appears and, reading his thoughts, assures him that this realm is not the afterlife. The angel expresses how glad he is to finally have a visitor after years, but at the same time shows grievance because Ryo has just passed away in his home world after getting hit by Truck Kun. Ryo is already aware of that, and he also figures that he's about to be reincarnated. So he asks the angel, naming him Angel Michael in his head, what he should do in his next life. Michael advises him to live however he wants to. Ryo has always wanted to live a slow and boring life, and after getting Michael's approval, he gets ready to be reincarnated into the world full of magic known as Phi. Before letting him go, Michael tells Ryo more about the world of Phi. According to Michael, only 20% of the world's population knows how to use magic, and in Ryo's case, he can also use magic and is most compatible with the water element. Since he requested a slow, boring life, Michael transports him to the forest of Rondo to live alone in a small cottage. Michael has already arranged 2 months' worth of food in a small ice house. Inside the cottage, he has also left 2 books that can help Ryo learn both about the world and how to use magic. And only after reading the book does Ryo learn how to summon a small body of water out of nowhere. For now, he doesn't need to worry about being harmed by the forest monsters, because Michael has created a barrier around the house. Ryo once again practices using water magic and is able to create a water ball just by imagining it, discovering that he no longer needs to chant the spell out loud. Pretty convenient for the main character. Using his magic, Ryo then fills the bathtub with fresh water, which I think is gross because the water is technically coming from his insides. The water in the bathtub is super cold, so he must now find a way to heat it up. He gets ready to light a fire using, of course, the most ancient, inefficient technique known to mankind. After failing to light a spark after several attempts, he gives up and wonders if there's a way to work around this with magic. Putting his previous life's chemistry lessons to good use, Ryo separates hydrogen from oxygen, which causes the water to crystallize and turn into ice. Now that he has ice, he uses it as a medium to condense the sun's rays, using it like a magnifying glass, and manages to unlock fire. With that fire, Ryo finally unlocks hot water and takes a slow, long bath. His thoughts clear up, and with his mind refreshed, he realizes that he can just make hot water using magic by applying the same technique in reverse that he used to make ice. But that's for later. For now, he goes to eat dinner. While eating, he realizes he must start hunting soon as his food supply will run out. But he hesitates because if he goes out into the forest, he's surely going to encounter monsters, which he believes he cannot defeat with that small knife Michael left him. This means he will now have to unlock offensive magic as well. The next day, Ryo works on his first attack spell, Water Ball, but it doesn't deal any damage to the target tree, so he modifies the spell, narrowing the ball into the size of an arrow. Only after hours of practice does he manage to unlock the most basic form of the Water Jet spell, which, to be fair, still doesn't deal any damage to the target tree. The following day, he works on improving his ice magic since his water magic hasn't shown any signs of effectiveness in battle. He carefully creates an ice crystal but fails to levitate it because projecting ice is not as easy as water. Still, after several hours of practice, Ryo manages to summon several ice crystals at once, but still fails to launch them at the tree. After several days of trial and error, he becomes skilled enough to at least form ice crystals in an instant, but he still doesn't possess enough power to use them as projectiles. Regardless, because time is running out, Rio works around it, using the ice crystal as a spearhead and venturing into the forest. Near a riverbank, he finds some quartz and is glad because he can now use it to light a fire in case he depletes all his mana. He then goes to collect some medicinal herbs when a monster named Lesser Boar targets him as an easy kill. The boar charges straight at him, but out of fear, Rio fails to move his feet, which almost ends his isekai journey right then and there. But at the very last second, the thought of dying again helps him jump away. This time, he uses magic to his advantage, making the ground slippery by turning it into ice, causing the boar to slip. He then quickly makes several icicles appear before the boar, and the boar ends up getting pierced to its demise. The adage, "desperate times call for desperate measures," suits him so well, because see him pull off water magic in the heat of the moment. Well, it was a great attempt, but he's still nowhere close to being good. He goes home and immediately learns about monsters in the Monster Compendium, and it doesn't take him long to realize that lesser boars are the weakest of all monsters. He takes his time to read through the book, to learn about other creatures he might encounter, because maybe his slow life isn't actually slow. He reads the page that talks about dragons, and all the book can tell him is that when he sees a dragon, he should run. It's not like he can outrun it. He'll still die, but he should still make an attempt to run. He flips to the next page that talks about an Akuna. For this monster, he doesn't even have to run. He just has to pray he doesn't encounter it. The book doesn't seem to help him much, but he keeps reading. You'd assume he'd be discouraged by his last hunting encounter, but a boy can't stay indoors forever. Hence, the following day, he prepares himself and goes outside again. The day starts on a good note as he finds a tree with fruits. When he takes the first bite, it truly makes up for all the stress he went through the previous day. It tastes so good. Well, it brings him another stage of stress as an assassin hawk flies toward him and knocks him down. He sees that the hawk is stronger than he is, and there's no way he can conquer it. The hawk uses air magic that is invisible, so there's no way he can fight back. He remembers the idea from the book and runs, but how will he outrun a bird? Seeing he's trapped, he stops to fight. He uses his ice magic to trap the hawk. When he assumes the hawk is dead, he goes closer to it, but the hawk breaks through the ice, though one of its eyes is injured. When the hawk realizes he's stronger than before, it runs off. He sighs in relief and collapses to the ground, complaining that the slow life he asked for isn't actually slow. He tries to find his way back home but realizes he's lost after running from the hawk. As he navigates the forest, he sees something that scares him, a Dullahan. It has no head, and smoke pours from its neck. The Dullahan is tending to its horse. One way or another, he finds his way back home. As time goes on, he trains to get better. From fighting several monsters to fishing, he upgrades his ice magic so much that his ice can now cut through a mountain. He keeps trying to get stronger, and at this point, he's getting a hang of his new life. However, every night he returns to the place where he found the Dullahan to fight it. Not because he wants to win, but maybe because it makes him stronger. He doesn't know much about Dullahans, because there's nothing about them in the monster compendium he's reading. So it's either the Dullahan isn't a monster, or it's not in the beginner's book. After another failed fight, he admits that the only reason he keeps coming back is because he feels the Dullahan wants to make him stronger. He watches as the Dullahan makes an ice sword. The Dullahan holds the sword toward him, and he takes the hint that it wants him to have it. After he accepts the sword, the creature leaves peacefully. The next few days, or maybe weeks, are calm for Rio. Well, until he encounters the revengeful hawk again. On that fateful day, he's training as usual when he sees the hawk in front of him. He notices it's missing an eye, so he immediately knows it's the same one he fought before. However, the hawk wasn't black before, but now it is. It also looks bigger, which means it has evolved. The hawk comes at him with so much strength that Rio evokes his 5-layer ice wall, but the hawk breaks through it without stress. He invokes the 10-layer wall, and the hawk breaks that too. When he uses his ice lancer, the hawk flies right through it to attack him. The stick he uses for support falls, and in the heat of the moment, he picks up the sword he got from the Dullahan and attacks the hawk. The sword works. The hawk falls back, then comes at him again with full force, but he uses the sword to pierce it, and it falls. He walks up to the hawk, admitting that the creature is quite determined. Well, he had taken its eye again, and he knows the hawk wanted to fight back. However, for him, fighting the hawk has made him stronger, so he has the hawk to thank for that. He also admits that the hawk evolved just to fight him, so he gives it a moment of honor by letting it die by his hand. He removes his sword, and the hawk dies. He continues his journey, unaware that a dragon is nearby. The dragon comes up to him and speaks. He's shocked that he can hear a dragon's voice. The dragon is also glad that he can use his telepathy again. He asks Rio if he's seen an evolved hawk, and Rio says he killed it. The dragon wonders how Rio could have the power to do that, so Rio shows him the sword. The dragon recognizes it as the sword of the Fairy King and asks what Rio did to the Fairy King to receive such a gift. But Rio doesn't know either. Since he's done with his questions for Rio, Rio also asks him a few questions. They talk until it's late, before the dragon says he has to leave. Before leaving, Rio introduces himself, and the dragon says his name is Lewin. Rio is literally having a swell time in his new life. So much so that the angel who reincarnated him checks his slab again and realizes he missed something important. Rio has a hidden feature in this new world that the angel didn't notice because the last person he sent there didn't have the same power. It's the power of eternal youth. How will Rio use this power? What does this mean for him? By the riverbank, a strange boy with a red hair lays on the sand. Who is he? Rio, on his early morning hunt to the seashore to collect some seafood, stumbles upon a shipwreck. Completing his Robinson Crusoe arc, he sees a man's body beside the boat and, after checking his pulse, realizes that his soul has permanently despawned from this world. Rio then notices another man named Abel on the other side of the wrecked boat, and, thankfully, this guy is alive and breathing. A bit of backstory. Abel and a few other people were on a journey by this boat when a crazy thunderstorm erupted out of nowhere. In the midst of the thunderstorm, a titan octopus attacked their boat, causing everyone to drown as the boat broke into two pieces. Thankfully, the incident happened nearby, and that's how they washed ashore here. Currently, Rio has brought Abel, who's still unconscious, to his house and goes out to do some household chores. In the meantime, Abel awakens and wonders where he is. He walks out of the house to find a literal flower garden and a stone path in the middle leading to the forest, all made by Rio. Rio shows up, expressing how glad he is to learn that Abel is okay, even though he doesn't know who this guy even is. Abel, on the other hand, is shocked because he didn't sense Rio's presence at all. Does this mean he has a skill that allows him to scan his surroundings? In any case, what bothers Abel the most is Rio's die-hard Robinson Crusoe roleplay. He wants to ask Rio if he's a hillbilly who doesn't have any clothes, but then stops himself as he doesn't want to leave a bad impression on their first interaction. So, he politely introduces himself, expressing his gratitude and thanking Rio, assuming he saved his life. Rio, in reply, states that he doesn't deserve any praise at all, since the only thing he did was carry him to his home. That said, Rio becomes serious, breaking the bad news that all of the others have passed away. Abel tells Rio not to feel bad for them, revealing that everyone else on his boat were smugglers. As he's about to go into details, his stomach growls, so Rio suggests they continue this topic while having lunch together. Now that they are acquainted, Abel asks Rio if he has no set of clothes, and Rio casually explains that he can't make any because he doesn't have the materials like thread or cloth needed to do so. Abel, in response, argues that Rio can just go buy some clothes from any nearby town, but then instantly realizes that Rio must not have any money with him since he's living the life of an exiled saint. Abel, of course, doesn't know where they are and is only assuming there are towns nearby. So, Rio explains the situation to him, informing him that there aren't any towns nearby, and that's why he's been forced to live like this. Abel asks Rio how he manages to gather food and stuff, and becomes absolutely astounded when Rio reveals that he is a water magician. Abel is impressed because, from what he knows, only 50% of people in the central province know how to use magic. This upsets Rio, as he thought he was a bit more special, since the angel Michael informed him that only 20% could do so. In any case, Abel wants to check something, so he requests Rio to bring him back to the shipwreck again. When they reach the coast, They surprisingly find no bodies there, and Rio assumes that the bodies were washed away by the sea or eaten by some monsters. This just means if Rio hadn't saved Abel's life, Abel would have been eaten as well. So Abel owes it even more to Rio for saving his life, and states that even though they are strangers, Rio is a true friend. Anyway, Abel searches the shipwreck but fails to find the thing he came here for, so he makes changes to his plans, deciding to meet up with his friends at the town of Loon, which he assumes is to their north. He invites Rio to join him on his journey, stating he needs a guide since he doesn't know where Loon is. Rio has no idea himself, but still agrees to be Abel's guide and states that they can commence their journey tomorrow, as he needs some time to prepare for everything. Abel accepts and shakes hands on this deal. Later in the evening, Rio bids goodbye to his Stardew Valley life, and then goes out into the forest to also say farewell to Dullahan, the mythical creature that trained him. Rio tells Dullahan about his plans to leave tomorrow, but promises that one day he will return. He expresses how grateful he is to Dullahan for all the things he has done for him, and decides to spar one last time with his guru. They go all out, and after a long, heated battle, Dullahan is unsurprisingly the one standing. Now that it is time to depart, Dullahan gives Rio a farewell gift, a proper main character outfit for this homeless loser. The next morning, Rio, now in his new outfit, begins his journey with Abel to the north, leaving behind his medieval solo life. On their way, they encounter a wild boar, and Abel steps up to deal with the situation. Although he can't use magic, he uses a sword skill to enhance his movement and impales the boar, slaying it with a single strike. The forest seems never-ending, and they have to set up camp that night beneath a large tree. They continue their journey the next morning and arrive near a pond, where they notice a lizard-man couple having a private moment together in the distant water. Abel doesn't want to pick a fight with them, stating that lizard men are quite strong, so they take a detour to the left. However, Rio, using his detection skill, senses some creatures running toward them and suspects that the lizard men may have noticed their presence. Abel tells Rio to stay behind him, but Rio refuses, as he senses many enemies approaching. Abel doesn't think Rio's magic will be of any use without a magic staff, but to Abel's surprise, Rio doesn't need one. He doesn't even need to chant any spells. In an instant, he summons several ice crystals and launches them at 4 approaching lizard men, taking them all out immediately. Within a few seconds, the entire fight, which the proud Abel couldn't end, ends easily. After Rio finishes defeating the monsters, Abel asks him what he just used because he hasn't seen that before. Rio doesn't think it is that special. All he used was a water lancer. He tells Abel it isn't special, but Abel feels otherwise, especially because he saw that Rio had invoked 4 lancers at the same time, contrary to his previous knowledge that mages can only invoke 1 magic at a time. He tells Rio he is concerned, and Rio indeed comments that he is ignorant of that fact. He tries to divert the entire conversation, but Abel insists that it works that way for the wind mages he knows. So Rio reminds him that he is a water mage. Before they continue their journey, Rio does an incantation and brings out water to drink. He reminds Abel that they are exhausted and they have a long day ahead, so they should drink water. Abel takes it, but he remains worried about something again. The incantations that Rio had done to invoke the water are quite different from the ones he is used to, but Rio doesn't give him an audience. They continue their journey, and as they get nearer to Luna, Abel gives Rio a coin that could be spent at Luna. Rio is so excited. That is the first time he has held money since he got to that world. Seeing his excitement, Abel explains to him that there are several other currencies like that, and the currency is that of the Kingdom of Nightly, a kingdom that Luna is a member of. He further tells him that there are 3 cities in that kingdom: Luna, Handalio Federation, and Debuhi Empire. Immediately Abel mentions Debuhi. Rio pauses, which makes him wonder if Rio had an interaction with the city before. He asks Rio, who says no. Rio was taken aback because of the name of the city. He feels the name doesn't sound good, and it wouldn't be good if he were a member of that city and introducing himself with that name. Good for him, because he is indeed not a member of that city. They continue their walk and make jest about this. They walk past some rocks and Abel notices that a rock is moving. He attacks the rock and Rio joins in too, but realizes that they have entered into a rock golem nest. The rock keeps gathering itself, and Abel runs to stab it, but it regenerates. Seeing that Abel's sword isn't doing anything, Rio invokes a 10-layer ice rock and hits it on 2 of the rocks. It overpowers the rocks, so he proceeds to do the same for the other ones. When they get to the last one, he sees that the rock isn't moving. He realizes that it is because it is lying on its back. They get their power from the floor, and if they are lying on their back, they have no power. They also see a magic core under their feet, and Abel recognizes that the rocks must have killed several monsters, so the cores are great. They decide to take it as their tour spoil, and Rio considers going to take from the other golems, but notices that the golems are fighting the ice rocks, so they excuse themselves. They walk further and see another monster. Rio assumes it is just a frog, but Abel thinks it is a behemoth. Life doesn't even give them enough time to argue about what it really is, as they see several wyverns flying there too. They are in the middle of a war zone, but they are also lucky. Since the behemoth is also a victim in that fight, they are sure it won't let the wyverns defeat it. They turn out to be right, as the behemoth fights back with magic and wins. Rio is excited about the things he has encountered so far. That night, they set a fire and they talk. Rio teases Abel that he had thought Abel would fight the behemoth too, and he would watch a round 2 of the fight. This boy is really wicked, but it is just a joke. They talk about the magic negation that the behemoth had used to fight, and Abel says he had only seen it as a trap in dungeons. The idea of a dungeon excites Rio, and when Abel notices, he asks him if he is interested in a dungeon, and he says yes. Well, he is so lucky because the only dungeon in the entire kingdom is at Luna, and that is the city they are going to. Rio teases that Abel had kept that a secret from him and didn't tell him from the beginning, but Abel insists that he didn't know Rio was interested in dungeons in the first place. When Rio insists on knowing the other things that Abel could be hiding from him, Abel asks him if he has seen dwarves and elves before, because he is indeed in luck. There are several dwarves at Luna, and they are quite strong. When he says this, Rio says he knows that already, and Abel wonders how he knew. He also says there is just an elf in Luna, and Rio insists he is familiar with that information too. They continue their journey into the mountain, and Rio informs Abel that after they cross that hill, they will find a human community. Abel doesn't expect Rio to know this information, so he asks Rio again. Rio remembers that it was the dragon that told him when they were talking, but he also knows there is no way he could explain that to Abel and he would believe, so he tells Abel to forget about it. As they continue their journey, a high-grade monster threatens them. When Abel feels its presence, he prepares to fight, but when he sees the mighty mountain in front of him, he gets so scared that he doesn't bother fighting, and he has difficulty breathing. Luckily, Rio calls his attention and throws meat at the monster. After the bird swallows the meat, it leaves them. Abel sighs in joy that it is all over. He is glad that Rio could cover up for him. They continue their journey and wonder what is wrong with that area. The monsters they have seen there aren't monsters that humans should be fighting. There is something wrong in that hill. They remember that the wyverns had always flown from the north, so they assume that they are around the North Mountain. They peep towards the side of the hill and see several wyverns eating the carcass of another monster. They realize that they are right. Abel plans that they shouldn't fight, but Rio thinks otherwise. He thinks they should fight, and if they are fighting, it is best they fight now that the wyverns are on the ground. They go to fight and win, but they are confronted with several other wyverns flying towards them. Rio uses his magic to kill them from the sky. Abel goes for their gem. Abel is already excited about the fight, so when several other monsters come, he is so happy. By the time they are done with the fight, they look at themselves and smile. It is a great partnership. Let's see how the partnership will end. Rio and Abel continue their journey while discussing whether they should ever risk running into wyverns again. While Rio doesn't mind fighting these monstrous beasts, Abel doesn't want to face such danger. Still, he is glad that Rio did fight the wyverns earlier, as they now have a whole bag of magic stones that they can trade for a lot of money. Anyway, the two of them reach an area far north and notice a thin road in the distance, which indicates that they will find a town if they follow the road. Abel looks around, and since the road leads to what looks like freaking Mount Everest to the east, he thinks they should start walking west instead. Abel seems to recognize the icy mountains, but he doesn't tell Rio about it and only informs him that if they follow the path east, they will reach a town named Kailadi. Rio is glad to hear this news and expresses how much he's been wanting to sleep in a bed recently. Abel is surprised to hear that Rio is a relaxer type guy, as he's thought of Rio as a caveman who only wants to fight monsters. In any case, Abel starts suggesting to Rio what he should do once they reach Kailadi, telling him about the local cuisine, which, according to him, is extremely tasty. It doesn't take the two friends too much time to reach the town, and once they do, they enter a local restaurant for food, where Abel informs Rio about adventurer guilds, advising him to register as an adventurer since he's quite strong. According to Abel, the guild card also acts as an identity card, and with it, Rio will get permission to enter anywhere in this nation for free. Rio does like the idea, since this time when they entered the town, Abel had to pay the guards a silver coin for him at the gate so he could enter. Abel also tells Rio another perk of joining the Adventurers Guild, which is that he can trade magic stones and monster loot, but also mentions that he would have to be an alchemist to make use of such items. Rio, a chemistry lover, is highly interested in alchemy, so he starts considering becoming an adventurer. The waitress serves them curry and rice, and Rio is honestly surprised that this world too has the generic food items from his previous world. He whispers to himself how in generic isekai anime, the protagonist has to go through a lot before they can recreate food from their home world. And since food like curry already exists here in the world of Fi, Rio considers this a total blessing. In any case, he digs in and becomes a bro mukbanger, asking for seconds and thirds. The next morning, he once again mentions how much he loved the curry, making Abel wonder if this caveman never ate decent food before. Since Abel didn't mention anything about the town having curry, Rio jokes that Abel is perhaps keeping more juicy secrets from him, which catches Abel off guard, hinting that he is perhaps keeping some secret from Rio. The two begin their journey again through meadows and farmlands, and soon find themselves on the outskirts of their destination, the town of Loon. As they reach the entrance gate of the town, the gate guard recognizes Abel and is shocked to see him because there's been news of him going missing. Abel doesn't have the time to explain the situation, but just tells the guard that the man here with him saved his life. The guard thanks Rio for saving Abel and very enthusiastically shakes Rio's hand. Since Rio hasn't registered as an adventurer yet, he needs to pay an entry fee, and Abel, once again, does it for him, paying the guard a silver coin as the fee. The guard once again welcomes Abel back to town and asks him what he plans to do now. As they converse, Rio realizes that Abel must be pretty famous and quite friendly with everyone here. Anyway, Abel and Rio make their way to the Adventurers Guild first, and on their way, Abel tells Rio that normally when a person registers, their rank starts from rank F. But since Abel is a veteran adventurer, he thinks he can vouch for Rio's skill, and with that reference, Rio can start from E or even D. The regular ranking rules apply in this world as well, which means that the higher a person's rank is, the more difficult the quest they can take. Abel doesn't think Rio will ever need to do any quest, as he believes Rio will be stacked with money once he sells all of the magic stones they have in their possession. They have so much that selling all of them at once might crash the market, so Abel wants to consult with the guildmaster first, deciding to have him figure out what to do. They enter the guild, and immediately everyone in there is shocked and overjoyed to see that their friend Abel is alive and well. As dozens of people surround Abel, Rio smiles as he's never expected to have made such a popular friend. He goes outside, not wanting to get in anyone's way, and decides to take a stroll when he runs into an elf girl who takes interest in his outfit. Recognizing it as the Fairy King's outfit, Rio is confused because he has no idea who the Fairy King is, and unfortunately, the elf girl claims she's in a hurry, so she leaves without explaining, hoping they will meet again soon. Abel comes out looking for Rio and brings him inside, introducing him to everyone as the man who saved his life. He then pushes Rio forward, and everyone expresses how happy and grateful they are to him. After everyone goes back to their own business, Abel brings Rio to the guild receptionist for the registration process and endorses Rio, asking the receptionist to register him as a D-rank adventurer. The receptionist can't believe a man like Abel, who is from the Crimson Sword Party, is personally endorsing someone. She reveals that this is the first time anyone from this party is doing such a thing, and that means Rio must be someone really special. The receptionist approves it, but states that there's still a physical assessment process that Rio must go through too. Speaking of which, Abel wants to speak with the guildmaster, and so the receptionist brings them to the meeting room, where Hugh the guildmaster barges in upon hearing Abel has returned. The fact that they could pass through that mountain and return alive is shocking, even for Hugh, who is the guildmaster. Abel asks Hugh if that fact is enough for him to rank Rio up, since he knows that there is no way a non-skilled person can pull that off. Hugh admits that he is right and accepts that he will rank Rio up. Before they could finish their conversation, a team barges into the room. The team contains members of Abel's party, Lynn, Warren, and Rhea. When Lynn sees Abel and confirms that he is alive, she falls on her knees. She cannot imagine that she would see him again. He stands up and goes to meet them and apologizes for making them disturbed. He admits that he would have died if Rio hadn't saved him, so Rio is who they should be appreciating. Hugh knows that the party has a lot of catching up to do, so he excuses them and asks the guild clerk, Nina, to prepare the materials needed for registration while he lets the party use the room for their catching up. Rio attempts to leave with Hugh, but Abel calls him back, telling him they have something to do together and instructing him to wait by the guild after his registration. As Rio walks away, Hugh reads through his mind and sees he is confused as to how popular Abel is. He explains that Abel's party, the Crimson Sword, is the strongest party in the village, and everyone felt Abel's absence. Rio asks if he will be registering in D rank, and Hugh says yes. He admits that he knows Abel. Abel is strong. However, he also knows that Abel wouldn't successfully conquer those monsters if he didn't have a good support system. So he is very sure that Rio is very good too, meaning he has no problem with registering him in the D rank. He takes him into another office, and Nina comes there with the materials. He leaves Nina to deal with the registration while he does the paperwork involved in the guild. Nina introduces herself and brings a book. She asks important questions like Rio's skills and level, and also asks if he had been to a dungeon before. When he says no, she tells him they have dungeoning classes every month and asks if he wants to sign up. He decides to sign up, and she tells him about their next class by 9 in a few days. He is shocked that there is time there, and she tells him there is a clock in the middle of the city. Since he has no place to stay, she tells him he could stay at the guild's lodge for 300 days after his registration. After her paperwork is done, she brings his card and asks him to put his palm on a system. The system prints on his card, and the process finishes. They leave the room, and Hugh is glad that Abel is back. He complains about how the entire city had been a mess due to Abel's absence. Rio returns to Abel, who takes him around. Abel tells him they are going to get the money for the stones they have sold, and he also intends to buy clothes and a staff for Rio. Rio appreciates his kind gesture, but wonders why Abel wants to buy him a staff. Abel says a magician should use a staff, but he insists he is fine without it. Also, that isn't that much of a concern since he always has a sword with him. Abel doesn't even think he has a sword, but he shows Abel the sword by his side. Abel sees it as just a knife because it is very small. He says that it is a sword and he can use it. His entire life is a shock to Abel, and he also has things he is confused about. He needs to ask Abel questions. After shopping and a series of questions, he finds out that that world also has 24 hours in a day. 7 days make a week, and there are 30 days in a month, just like Earth. With the curry he ate too, he can guess that someone from Earth had reincarnated there and changed the world. Abel comes to meet him, and he appreciates Abel for the things he bought. Abel informs him that there is somewhere else they have to get to, and as the guest of honor, he can't refuse. Abel takes him to his welcome party, and they have fun and drink throughout the night. The following morning, he is tired. He takes a walk to his lodge with Nina, who admits that he must have had a swell evening. She talks about how Ra, Abel's supposed brother, didn't leave Rio's side at all because he was so appreciative of what Rio had done for them. That wasn't really what stressed Rio. He is stressed because he drank a lot the night before. They eventually arrive at the lodge, and Nina opens the door. The room has 2 people already, and Nina introduces Rio as their last roommate. The 2 roommates, Niels and Eto, introduce themselves, and Nina reminds Rio of his class the next day before taking her leave. After she leaves, Niels talks about how pretty she is, but Eto isn't interested in Niels's delusions, so he goes to speak with Rio instead. They exchange pleasantries and plan that they will be casual throughout their stay. Nina knocks again and brings another roommate, Eamon. She looks young and they ask for her age. She reveals she is 16, but her parents just died, so she had decided to earn a living by adventuring. Nina asks them to welcome her and tells Rio to come for the class with her the next day. Meanwhile, Abel tells his party what he had witnessed with Rio, how Rio had used magic without a staff, how he used ice to kill wyverns, and other things he did. One of the party members, Lynn, cannot believe what Abel is saying. She argues with facts that it could never be true because magic uses proximity and distance. But Abel insists that is exactly what he had seen. He even talks about how Rio had used ice blocks to kill wyverns, which Lynn thinks is impossible. Another party member, Ria, comments that there is only one legend that was that strong, and it was the Inferno Magician. They think of all they have heard about the Inferno Magician as just rumors, since no one witnessed it. Another concern is that if Rio is that strong, then he could turn against them or support the Empire. But Abel reassures them that Rio can't support the Empire because Rio hates the name of Debuhi Empire. On the other hand, Rio laughs and jokes with his new roommates as he considers how much his life has changed. After a short period of learning, their class has eventually ended, and Rio is just excited that he is now allowed to go to the dungeon. That is indeed the first time he is hunting a dungeon, and he feels good. Amon, who sits right beside him, doesn't feel the same way. He is too scared to enter the dungeon and doesn't think they are prepared for something like that. He calms her down, saying it isn't a lot and that he will enjoy it, but he still looks obviously scared. Their teacher asks if any student has a question, and Rio offers to ask one. He asks their teacher if it is possible to use a skill to disappear from the level of the dungeon that he has cleared to the ones that are uncleared. The teacher is impressed by the knowledge he has and reveals that although it is something that works in other dungeons, in their dungeon, the skill isn't available to be used. However, the teacher compliments him, and Amon also figures that he is very strong. He turns to Rio and asks how he had learnt all of that, but he reassures her that it isn't an issue and that he will learn it over time. To conclude their class, they are going to clear the dungeon. Their teacher tells them that he will take them into the dungeon, and he takes them there. By the time they reach the gate, he shows them that their dungeon is in the middle of the town. Their entire town revolves around the dungeon. Hence, anything that happens in the dungeon and escalates will put the city in trouble. As a result, the dungeon has double gates to ensure that when there is an issue, the people are safe. Also, there is a yearly period called the Great Tidal Boar, where monsters are plenty, and the fight in the dungeon becomes intense. The monsters can explode, so the gate preserves the city. Rio is shocked that things can get to that level, but Amon is scared because he doesn't know that they can get attacked at any time. The teacher realizes that he is scared and tells her that he doesn't have to be scared because there is still a long time to go. The teacher also shows them that there is a secretary at the front of the guild, where everyone who enters must write their name and the time they enter. But since they came from the guild, they do not have to register. They proceed into the guild, and their teacher tells them that the first stage of the dungeon has been cleared so they can enjoy walking around, but must be very careful and stay close so they won't get injured. Amon holds on to Rio throughout the trip. They get to a place and Rio sees it is very dark. It means there is something there. He calls Amon's attention to it, and they prepare for it. By the time the monster comes, it's a soldier ant. Rio uses his ice to hold the soldier ant down and tells Eamon to use her sword. He goes nearer to fight, Since the ant has been held down, he hits it with her sword, and the ant dies. Rio is glad he could do that, but he doesn't think it is a big deal since Rio was the one who held it down. Rio goes closer and tells Amon they should take the crystal and get paid for it. Amon isn't too informed about adventuring, so he doesn't know they can do that, and Rio reminds her that they are adventurers, and the profession is meant to pay their fees, so they should do that. They leave the dungeon, feeling excited about what they have done that day. Their roommates, Niels and Ato, meet them at the guild to celebrate with them for the feat, and they have a great time drinking. Well, not drinking alcohol, since alcohol isn't allowed in the guild. They discuss why alcohol isn't allowed. I guess my boys just want to celebrate and get high, but they are forgetting that adventurers do not have the luxury of getting high. Niels compliments the duo for getting a crystal on their first adventure, but Amon throws the compliment away, reminding herself that it wasn't her work, but Rio's powers. Rio reminds her of her hit too. Amon reveals he wishes to return to the dungeon the next day and even go to the upper layer, but he is scared of going there alone. Luckily, Rio also has plans to be there the next day. He plans to visit the second layer, so he offers that they go together. As they talk, Rio expresses his concerns about meeting an ant in the first layer. According to what he learnt in class, only bats are on that layer. Niels also comments that he has been hearing rumors about ants coming to the second and first layers, and this to them calls for concern. Luckily, Abel arrives right in time to reassure them. He informs them that the reason is because ants can crawl, so they crawl themselves down, and there is no reason to be concerned. He teases them, and they laugh. Niels didn't know who Abel is at first until Rio talks. When he finds out who Abel is, he quickly stands up for a handshake, considering that Abel is his celebrity crush, whom he had hoped to see for a long time. Abel informs them that the reason he is there is because he had just returned from an adventure and has to report. Before he could continue with them, his teammates who had been waiting for him around find their way there and remind him that they have to meet the guildmaster. Since he doesn't want to leave, Warren carries him on his neck and takes him away. Lynn spends her time staring at Rio so much that it bothers Riha, who drags her and tells her they should leave too. On their way, she asks Lynn why she was staring that much, and Lynn reminds her of all they have heard about Rio, claiming that if he is that strong, then she is interested. Abel reassures them that they will surely see him in action, and they don't have to be anxious. The following day, Amon wakes up excited to fight. He runs out, but Rio calls him to be calm. They find their way to the dungeon, where they are having a great time fighting every monster that comes their way. Indeed, teamwork makes the dream work. However, Amon feels a shortage of breath. Rio offers to help him, so he stretches out his hands and helps him up. He sits down to rest. Rio, who is amazed by his sword work, asks him where he has learnt how to fight. In an earlier conversation, he had told him that he learnt from a school teacher. That skill is too great for someone who isn't an adventurer. Amon reveals that his teacher, Kiro, was a sword master. He knew how to fight, and he was trained at an academy in the city. Rio wants to know more, so he inquires further and finds out that Kiro attended Hume School. He compliments the skills but reveals that it is a very energy-demanding one. However, when Amon fights more and gets better with it, he would be able to handle it better. A person doesn't just become a swordsman by fighting, but by consistency. They talk about Rio's skills too. Amon knows Rio to be a mage, but he also knows Rio's sword skills are great. He wonders if Rio had a teacher, and Rio says yes, although he doesn't talk about the Fairy King. Concluding the sweet conversation, Rio tells Amon about his trip with Abel and how Abel wakes up every morning to practice his sword skills. If Abel, despite how strong he is, practices every morning, then Amon should hold consistency tight too. It is an insightful conversation, and after resting, they return home. The following day, Rio sets out to leave, and his roommates wonder if he is going to the dungeon. He says no, as he has other things planned. He visits the library, and he is shocked at how big it looks. That is the first time he is seeing a library in that world, and it is good. The librarian takes him to the side with alchemy books, as that is his target. She advises that he starts with that so he can get things easier. Taking her advice, he picks 2 books and thinks of reading them. He goes outside to read and considers buying them instead so he could read at his convenient time. As he wonders how much it could be, he suddenly sees the moon covering the sun. As a normal person, he concludes that it is an eclipse of the sun, but that is something different. He feels a very bad omen, so he stands to know what is happening. Suddenly, he sees a very great firepower. He didn't just see it. That firepower is coming right at him. The first thing he feels is fear, but he has to defend himself first. He puts up an ice wall to protect himself. The attacker is shocked that a human is found in the midst of that, but she doesn't feel bad because she will just kill the human. The attacker looks like a monster with horns, and when Rio looks at her, he assumes it is an Akuma. He has to escape, but there is no way he can escape, so he chooses to protect himself first. He builds a wall of ice to defend himself from the next fire, and punctures with wings to escape. She shoots at him, but it hits his coat, and the coat protects him from the attack. The attacker is shocked that he could do that. When she looks at him, she sees his suit and recognizes that it is from the Fairy King. Regardless, she plans to kill him, so he brings out his sword to defend himself. For the next few minutes, a head-to-head fight occurs. The Akuma couldn't help but recognize that he is strong. She also recognizes that he has skills. She also notices that he is using a sword from the Fairy King, so she asks him who exactly he is, that the Fairy King is this magnanimous towards him. He attacks her back and throws ice lancers at her, but she runs so fast. He notices that she has so much speed, and she is using the wind to control her speed. She sets back at him and attacks him, but he escapes. He attacks her again. This time, it is quite unexpected. She escapes and asks if that is the best he can do. Luckily for him, the moon is gradually leaving the sun. She builds a wall against him and defends herself, but one of his attacks reaches her and injures her face. Feeling like she had her guard down, he jumps to attack her, but he is shocked to see her fight right back. They clash in the air, and she falls with him. Before she could fight back, he fights her again and buries her in the soil. She returns to the surface, and this time, looking like a real demon. The moon has gradually left the sun, so she is out of time. She agrees that it was a very great fight, and she wishes they could continue, but she is out of time. Well, he doesn't want to continue too. She informs him that what just happened was a cloister, and she doesn't have power over it. However, she is Leonore, and she asks for his name too. He calls her Akuma, which makes her know he knows who she is. She hopes to fight him again, but he does not want it. She leaves him with comments that he would have to fight Akumas again, but she wishes she will be the one to kill him. The sun returns, and she disappears. Rio is just glad that he survived. He is happy the coat has saved him, because if the coat wasn't there, a hole would have pierced his heart. He needs to get the book, so he goes to withdraw some money. After withdrawing, he is shocked at the amount of money in his account. He recalls that the guild master had earlier said that the crystals they brought had so much worth, but he didn't know it could be that expensive. He walks home, happy that he won't have to work for money, at least for a while. However, he is shocked that his roommates aren't in the room. He leaves to get his book, but sees them through the window. He sees that some of their fellow adventurers have ambushed his colleagues and injured them. The head of the boys brags that he didn't need to warn them about fighting, because monsters won't warn them before a fight too. As a result, he hits the boys from behind and reminds them he didn't need to warn them beforehand too. After a long day, he and his roommates go to wash up. His roommate, who is a priest, helps him heal his shoulder injury. But he is shocked that despite how deep the injury is, his bone isn't broken. They ask who he fought to get that kind of injury, but he doesn't want to tell them. He is just glad he survived, and he just hopes for better days. Rio's roommates are at the dungeon, and they, after a great struggle, manage to defeat a goblin archer. Eto heals Eamon's injuries using the lesser heal spell, while Niels collects the loot from the goblin corpses. They are currently on the 5th layer of the dungeon, and it doesn't quite make sense to Ito why there is a goblin archer in such a beginner level. Sensing danger, Niels decides that they head back to the surface and split whatever loot they've gotten 3 ways. Eamon doesn't want to leave though, having a lot of stamina left to fight, but Niels, whose idol Abel has told him strictly to put survival as his primary duty, has made this line his motto, and that's why he implores both Ito and Eamon that they head back. Bro's convincing enough, so they return, and on their way back, Eamon comments that if only Rio had come with them today, they would have been able to explore lower layers of this dungeon with ease. Rio, meanwhile, has gone out for some fresh air at the outskirts of the city. He can't help but keep thinking about his fight with the demon/Akuma Leonore. He can't believe how incredibly powerful Leonore's magic was, but he still thinks that in terms of the speed they both conjure magic, they are on an even footing. So, the only thing he needs to work on to avoid losing the next time they battle is to focus on increasing his power and turn his weaknesses into strengths. He also needs to find a way to counter Leonore's movement speed, which she can boost tenfold using wind magic. Since Rio can't use wind magic, he feels a little bit jealous and wonders if he can move quicker using water magic. He has used his water jet spell previously while being underwater to increase his diving speed, but he doesn't know how it can be applied on land. He looks at his feet, remembering ice skating, and realizes that if he just turns the ground into ice, the surface would have no friction at all, and theoretically, if he then uses water jet, he can increase his movement speed. However, as he gives it a go, it completely fails, making him give up on this completely. But not losing hope entirely, he decides to experiment on this technique later and heads back to town, deciding to visit the library later to research more on Akumas and alchemy. Abel's teammate Lynn is currently at the library, looking for something in the forbidden spellbook section. She's actually looking for any information that would help make sense of Abel's claim that Rio conjured a thick ice wall midair and spears of ice to pierce the wyvern's defenses, something that she believes is just impossible. I mean, she could just approach Rio and request him to show her his OP magic skills, but no, her ego won't let her do that, because her master, whom she considers to be one of the greatest magicians, isn't capable of performing magic like Rio. She thinks Abel was just exaggerating. An elf lady named Sarah comes there, and she seems to be a regular at the library. She greets Lynn and asks her what she's doing there since she rarely ever comes to the library, and Lynn replies that she only came here looking for some info, but didn't find it. She wonders if she should ask Sarah about it, but then decides not to involve another person in a matter that might not even be true. So, she changes the topic and asks Sarah when she returned to Lune. Apparently, Sarah was away on a quest for the royal capital, and Sarah claims that she just returned. In any case, Sarah has an envoy waiting for her, so she takes her leave, and Lynn kinda looks disappointed that she didn't get to speak with Sarah more. Niels, Ato, and Eamon return to the Adventurers Guild and come before the receptionist, Nina's desk. Niels, acting as riskless as ever, stutters to speak with a fine lady like Nina. So Ato takes the mic and informs Nina about the loot they've gotten. He shows her the big magic crystals that came from the goblin archers they defeated in the 5th layer. Nina finds that super unnatural because goblin archers have never been sighted in the 5th layer ever. Finding this matter concerning, Nina rushes to inform the guildmaster and thanks the rookie adventurers for bringing this matter to her attention. Hugh learns the news from her and states that goblin archers are only supposed to spawn below the 10th layer or so. He considers this a warning sign that something disastrous might happen soon, so he asks Nina if there are any B-rank parties in town who can tackle any bad situation in the near future. Nina reports that the Crimson Sword Party and the White Brigade Party are currently in town, and the latter returned 2 days ago from an excursion. Hearing this, Hugh asks Nina to summon both parties before him, as he wants to discuss this matter with them. After Nina tells the Crimson Sword to come meet the guildmaster, Abel kinda hesitates to go after learning that the White Brigade Party will also be there. Although Abel has been acquainted with Phelps, the leader of White Brigade, he's still hesitant. Regardless, he heads to the Adventurers Guild along with his teammates, and upon entering the guildmaster's office, they find that the White Brigade Party has already arrived there. Phelps confidently asks Abel how he's doing, and Abel, in reply, feeling awkward, greets Phelps. Now that both parties are present, Hugh first thanks them for coming. Then he briefs them about the situation. Abel cannot believe that the goblin archers actually came to the 5th layer, and asks Hugh if he is certain this is what happened. As Hugh says he's 100% sure this is the case, everyone understands, and Phelps asks what they should do now. Hugh tells them that he actually wants both of their parties to enter the dungeon immediately and look for signs of an early great tidal bore calamity. The great tidal bore is a term referring to an explosive growth in monster population, and because it's almost been a decade since the last time it happened, it is not too far-fetched to think that the next great tidal bore is coming to hit their town of Loon. Rhea agrees that the unusual monster appearances could be an early sign of the great tidal bore, so she agrees to go with Hugh's plan. Hugh, of course, is going to pay them for their efforts and gives them 100 gold coins in advance, promising them that once their task is completed, they will be given 200 more. Just to be on the same page, Abel once again asks Hugh if their task is only to verify whether the great tidal bore is coming or not, and Hugh replies in the affirmative, telling them that once they have confirmation, they should return to the surface and inform everyone so that they can lock the dungeon gate temporarily and prepare for the battle by summoning all of the adventurers and the regional knights. Hugh apparently has already informed the lord of this town about this quest and his plans for his countermeasure actions. Since Hugh is making such big plans, Abel can't help but think that Hugh believes the bore has already begun. Hugh clarifies that he just wants to be prepared for the worst, and once again tells both parties to head to the dungeon first thing the next morning. Both the Crimson Sword and the White Brigade accept the quest and leave, more determined than ever. The next early morning, everyone wakes up in Rio's room and sees that Rio has already gotten ready to head out. Niels asks Rio where he's headed, and Rio explains that he's going to visit the library again, this time the north-sided advanced section, so that he can learn more about alchemy. According to Eto, only D-ranked adventurers can enter the northern section, so it's pretty convenient for Rio, the main character. Eamon mentions hearing some rumors that the northern section contains forbidden books, and that gets Rio excited, because who doesn't want to learn things that they shouldn't? Unfortunately for Rio, though, an adventurer must be at least B-ranked to read those books. Rio calls it a shame, but his roommates tell him not to feel bad, because they're sure it won't take him any time at all to get promoted to B rank. In any case, Rio's determination motivates Niels to hit the dungeon again, and Eto and Eamon are willing to go with him as well for some adventuring. Rio leaves and heads to the library, where he wanders about in the northern section, not knowing where the books that contain knowledge related to Akumas are. As he climbs up the stairs leading to the second floor, he runs into Sarah and instantly becomes amazed by her beauty. Meanwhile, Abel's team and Phelps's team have arrived at the dungeon gate. Phelps has gathered 20 people for this mission, and most are C-ranked adventurers. Now that everyone's here, Hugh decides to open the dungeon gate, but Abel stops him, intuitively feeling that something bad is about to happen the moment they open the gate. So, taking defensive measures, he instructs Lynn to use the wind spell probe to scan the first layer of the dungeon first. Lynn accordingly performs the spell and senses more than a few hundred monsters at the entrance. This means that the Great Tidal Bore has already begun, so Hugh tells everyone to fall back and inform the knights and the other adventurers to take action immediately. The dungeon gates close, and Niels' team, who just came to the guild, learns that monsters are surfacing due to the bore. As everyone must join to tackle this emergency situation, Niels' team heads to the dungeon's first wall as well. Rio, on the other hand, completely unaware, is still staring at Sarah like a baboon. Sarah recognizes Rio, as she had run into him the day he came to this town. This time, she properly introduces herself to him, and she asks him if he came here looking for something. Rio doesn't want to reveal that he had an encounter with an Akuma, so he tells her about the other thing he came here for, alchemy, and specifically something that might help him create a golem. Sarah guides Rio to the section where books related to golem craft are, and on their way, they talk, and Rio learns that Sarah is also an adventurer belonging to a party named Win, and it's quite sad that she is the only member in her party. Back at the dungeon gate, everything is completely locked down, and all of the adventurers have gathered at the first wall, waiting for the monsters to break through the gate. Seconds later, the first wave of monsters breaks open, and the archers immediately fire their arrows at them. Among the monsters are many goblin archers, and they manage to injure several adventurers. But the fight keeps going as Commander Neville arrives with his knights. Hugh realizes that there are just way too many monsters, and the numbers weren't this high during the last boar. Even after a long, dreaded battle, the number of monsters doesn't decrease. Hugh suspects that a boss goblin will enter the fight soon, and Niels sends Hugh's message to Abel to prepare his party to fight that goblin boss. Being F-ranked adventurers, Niels, Eto, and Amon can't do much but help the other adventurers with delivery work. The sun almost sets, and most of the monsters are defeated, and Hugh, feeling uneasy by the silence, realizes that the boss monster will come at any second now. So he commands both the White Brigade and the Crimson Sword to get ready. They come down in front of the gate and defeat the weaker monsters first to ensure they don't become an obstacle later. As predicted, a gigantic Giga-Chad goblin, holding a long sword in his hand, walks through the gate, and judging from his size, Abel figures that he is a goblin general. Phelps thinks that once they defeat this monster, the battle will be over. However, as two more goblin generals show up, they realize that a goblin king is somewhere in the back who will come in the final wave. Abel and Phelps step up to fight two of the goblin generals, and Rhea and Shenna get ready to deal with the third one. However, before they can defeat the generals, an air-slash attack comes out of nowhere and slashes the generals in half. The air slash came from just a simple swing from the final boss, the Goblin King, and as he steps into the battlefield, the only competent adventurers who can take him on are Abel and Phelps. Abel uses his unique skill, Perfect Shadow, to sneak into range, then impales the Goblin King in his chest. However, it isn't enough to finish the job, so Lynn comes next, who was preparing a powerful spell all this time, and showers the monster with bullet rain, piercing his body from everywhere. With the Goblin King defeated, the battle is over, and the main character wasn't needed, LOL. However, unbeknownst to everyone, something ominous still lurks inside the dungeon, and it is perhaps far more dangerous than the Goblin King. A feast is thrown at the Adventurers Guild to celebrate their victory, and when Rio arrives, he is surprised as he clearly has no idea at all what happened here. Meanwhile, Guildmaster Hugh is in his office filling out official paperwork, concerned because researchers from the royal capital are going to come soon to study in detail what happened, which he believes will bring them more trouble than the Great Tidal Boar did. Going back to Rio, when he finally learns from his friends that the Great Tidal Boar ended without him even knowing it, he wonders if he's really the main character. Niels enthusiastically tells Rio about Abel's heroism and how he was able to battle the Goblin King on par. Abel arrives and joins his two friends, Lynn and Rhea, who have been looking for him for quite a long time. Lynn is a little mad because lately Abel has only been spending time with Rio, and Rhea wonders if Rio has become like Abel's favorite person or something. Rio realizes that although the girls have smiles on their faces, they are bitter and don't really want him near Abel. Still, he acts friendly and converses with them, which gives Lynn the opportunity to ask him if he can really conjure Ice Wall way above the sky. When Rio replies in the affirmative, Lynn asks whether he modified his spell or created an original one, because from her knowledge, no one in this world has such capabilities. Rio is unfamiliar with the term original spell, so Lynn explains that original spells don't follow existing incantations, and instead use new ones made by the user. Rio still doesn't understand what she's saying, because he doesn't even use incantations to cast magic, which leaves Lynn even more amazed. The next morning, Rio's friends are at the guild looking for new commissions, but find that there isn't even a single job listed on the notice board. Rio comes in and asks why they aren't at the dungeon. Niels explains that the dungeon is closed for maintenance and will stay closed for a few weeks. That's why they planned to take regular guild commissions. But because of the influx of adventurers like them, there is rarely any job left. In any case, they ask Rio why he's here instead of hiding in his little hole, and Rio explains that he's looking for some magic ores to practice alchemy. Unfortunately, all of the ores in town have been sold out. Since both Rio and his friends are in a similar pinch, Rio proposes hiring the three of them to collect magic ores for him. Eto mentions that there is an abandoned mine near a village to the south, and it takes 12 hours to walk there. Rio thinks it's doable and offers 4 gold to each of them for the job, and in addition offers to buy every magic copper ore they find for 25 gold. Clearly, he's stacked, and his friends gladly accept the commission. Once they leave, Rio returns to his room, where he overhears a commotion outside. Looking out the window, he finds a group of knights harassing a young girl and threatening to take advantage of her while laughing like maniacs. A local adventurer tries to stop these dirtbags from messing with the girl, so the leader decides to get rid of him first. But just as he draws his sword, he slips and falls to the ground. As he tries to get up, he slips again, crashing face first. Phelps, the captain of the White Brigade, enters the scene at that moment and reprimands the knights for harassing civilians when their sole duty is to protect them. The knights don't care, and it seems they just can't stand adventurers, so they try to pick a fight with Phelps as well. Phelps stops them for their own good, revealing that he is the heir to House Heinlein, a noble family. The head of this noble family is Phelps's father, who was once the commander of the Royal Knights, so the knights get scared and run off, knowing they will lose their heads if they meddle further. Both the adventurer, Dan, and the harassed girl thank Phelps for saving them. Phelps commends Dan for his bravery, encouraging him to keep fighting against evil and never change. He then gives Dan the task of safely escorting the girl to her friends, and accordingly, Dan leaves with her. With them gone, Phelps looks up and greets Rio, introducing himself. Phelps commends Rio, revealing that it was Rio who used his ice magic in secret to freeze the knight's shoe, causing him to slip. Phelps thanks Rio for his intervention, but has no time for more discussion, as he has other stuff to deal with. As Phelps walks away with his comrade Shenna, Rio wonders why a noble's son became an adventurer. Later that night, Rio is enjoying dinner alone when Abel comes to disturb his peace. As soon as Abel sits down at his table, Rio makes it clear that he's not going to pay for Abel's meal. Rio continues to joke around, asking Abel about his love interests and mentioning how he's noticed Lynn becomes jealous every time she sees them together. Abel clarifies that Lynn is only romantically interested in Warren, his other party member, so Rio suggests Abel make a move on Ria. Abel gets shy, begging Rio to stop saying these things so casually, so Rio gets a little more serious and asks Abel what he's doing here alone in the middle of the night. Abel replies that he's been given a job and doesn't want to do it alone, so he asks Rio to come along. They head out, and on the way, Abel tells Rio that a group of investigators have been dispatched to this city, and one of them is an old acquaintance of Abel's who has several royal guards as personal guards. However, some of those guards have apparently entered the entertainment district, and Abel has been handed the job by his acquaintance to bring them back before they can stir any trouble. Rio notices 2 sketchy-looking guys in the distance who don't look like locals, and Abel, finding this suspicious as well, follows them quietly to a dark alley where both of them are suddenly ambushed. Rio swiftly blocks the attack without even looking before knocking out all of the ambushers by dropping a giant ice block on their heads. Abel finds an alchemy tool on the ground, and hearing the word alchemy, Rio wants to get his hands on it, but Abel refuses to hand such a dangerous item to this problem child and focuses on investigating who the ambushers are first. He finds an ID card that reveals they are C-ranked adventurers from Géclair, the capital of Handelieu. Abel doesn't understand their purpose for coming here. Regardless, he ties them up and decides to hand them over to the town guard later. Meanwhile, Phelps is being secretly followed by the group of dirtbag knights from earlier. But before they can launch a sneak attack, they are suddenly stunned before getting scorched in flames. It's revealed that Shenna quite literally reduced them to nothing, with Phelps walking on unfazed as if he had expected her to handle it from the start. A shocking issue faces the kingdom when the investigation team from the Empire rides into the kingdom with several entourages. The team is led by Hilarion and Clive from the Royal Central University, with the mission of investigating the dungeon after the Great Tidal Bore. On the other hand, Rio also goes to the dungeon and finds out some shocking news. The dungeon is closed until further notice. It turns out that Hilarion and his team have used up the supplies of the kingdom, and they also want to reopen the dungeon that has been closed after the great tidal bore. Hugh reads the letter that had been sent by the Emperor, naming Hilarion as a minister in the city who also has the right to determine how the kingdom works after wars. Hugh doesn't think any of the ideas make sense. Why should they take their provisions and also order that the dungeon be reopened? They also claim they need adventurers who would be used for this mission. Despite how much Clive explains to Hugh that it is an instruction from above, Hugh insists that it is unreasonable and there is no way they should continue with it. Hilarion watches their conversation and sees that they aren't going to reach a conclusion. He apologizes for the way they had used the provisions and promises to reimburse them. That goes well for Hugh, but he is still unsure about the dungeon. When Clive insists that they have to proceed with opening the dungeon, he bulges but says that the adventurers and the guild wouldn't take any responsibility for anything that happens inside the dungeon because he knows it is risky. This is a very confusing situation for Clive, who doesn't want to accept it either. Eventually, Hilarion offers to pay adventurers at the standard rate so they can do the investigation with them. But Hugh warns him that it's not every adventurer that will take that money. He also warns that the dungeon after the great tidal bore can be very unpredictable and they must be very careful. On the other hand, Rio goes to the location of Abel's party with hopes of meeting him there. He lingers by the front of the door for a while and suddenly a little girl runs into the door and runs around. The girl returns and asks if Rio is an adventurer. She tells him she needs to get to the guild immediately, but he doesn't want to take her there because he needs to eat. She begs him, saying it is very important and there is something she must deliver. Reluctantly, Rio takes her to Abel and she drops a letter from Hilarion. Upon reading the letter, Abel sees that Hilarion wants to hire them to join the investigation team for the dungeon investigation. After Abel reads the message, he is filled with concerns. Rio also talks about how the dungeon was locked. Abel tells her that there was a time in history after the great tidal bore that a team of A-list adventurers disappeared from the dungeon. As the history had said, the team wasn't an ordinary team. It was a team led by a leader compared to a Superman. No one knows exactly why they had disappeared and where, so people avoid the dungeon after the great tidal bore. Rio isn't interested in all of that. He just wants to eat. He excuses himself, and the young lady watches him as he goes. After he leaves, the lady introduces herself as Natalie. She mentions her family name, and Lynn immediately connects that she is from the family of a great water mage. Lynn asks her if she has heard of a magician conjuring a water wall that is high while being afar off, and she says she hasn't heard it before. The other members of the party are shocked that Lynn is still concerned about Rio's power. Even Natalie is shocked that someone can use that kind of magic. They reveal to her that Rio can do it. Abel commands his party members that no matter what, they must not fight Rio, because he feels if they all come together to fight him, they will never win. He also tells Natalie that if she ever needs help, and they are not available, she should find Rio. Rio returns home to his roommates, who tell him that the dungeon is about to be open. He informs them that it is only for adventurers above D rank and they don't qualify. However, they are allowed to go for the briefing that will happen the next day. The following day, Abel meets Hilarion and the others to explore the dungeon. Hilarion gives him a magic tool that can check mana, and they all prepare to enter the dungeon. Abel tells his teammates that they are only exploring the first 7 levels that day, and they will take things slow. Meanwhile, the others go for the briefing. At the briefing, Hugh informs the adventurers that only adventurers above D rank can follow the investigation. He, however, reveals that lower-ranked adventurers who are interested can volunteer to follow the team going for supplies. Before the briefing ends, Rio asks for the color of the stone that was found in the monsters killed during the Great Tidal Bore, and Hugh announces that it was pale. Inside the dungeon, Abel and his party have explored for days without finding anything. There is no sign of monsters around, and it is shocking. As they consider what could be happening, they see Clive and the entire Royal Central University team rushing down. They wonder why they are in such a haste, and Rhea reveals she heard they believe there is something on the 38th level, and that is their target. Well, Clive and his team rush to the level they want until they see a black door. They don't know what is inside the door, but Clive is excited that they are the first to find it. He sets his equipment by the door and positions his students around it. By the time they release the magic, they all disappear. Natalie, who is checking their signals through a magic stone, suddenly gets no signal, and she is shocked.